Well, good afternoon. I'm going to start with good afternoon before good morning. Normally I say good morning, good afternoon, but this is a later episode today, and it's definitely good afternoon to our global audience in Europe and beyond. My name is John Carroll. I'm the CEO and founder of the Service Council, and welcome to today's In-Service podcast event. Today's discussion is executive in the passenger seat, a ride along for service. How many of you are getting out behind the desk and going to the front line and listening and learning and interacting with your front line? Well, today's guest is doing it commonly. Patrycja Sobera is our guest for today. She's a Senior Vice President and General Manager of Digital Workplace Solutions of Unisys Corporation. She is a member of our European Advisory Board. Welcome to today's discussion, Patrycja. It's so nice to have you.
Hi, John. Real pleasure to be here. Yes, delighted to have the conversation, and good evening from London.
Outstanding. London. I love it. I backpacked Europe as a young man, and London was one of our stops, and it was a beautiful, beautiful city. So saw the changing of the guard and all sorts of things at Buckingham Palace and every other landmark that you can possibly see. It was wonderful. Well, Patrycja, so we know and love you, have come to love you with your appointment to our European Advisory Board and immersing ourselves in your business in terms of benchmarking and all the good things. And we were the beneficiary of having you be a keynote speaker at last year's Smarter Services Executive Symposium. Shameless plug, mark your calendar, September 14th through the 16th in Chicago once again. But for those listening, you lead a large global organization at Unisys. Can you give our audience a sense of the scale of what your technicians do day to day and what inspired you to personally step out from behind the laptop and spend a day riding along with one of them?
Absolutely. Yes. Look, pleasure to be here. And thanks for the plug. And it was absolutely a pleasure to be in Chicago with all of you. Well, I have an absolute pleasure of leading Digital Workplace Solutions business unit at Unisys, which encompasses all of our support teams. And it's our service desk, it's our field operations, best part of 7,000 plus technicians globally who very much go out there every day, supporting thousands of our clients, their end users, with fixes and often working solo, always on the go, always on the move. So, from my perspective, from this very comfortable executive chair here in London, I felt it was so important to really get out there and accompany them on the job. And I happen to be in Australia, actually. So I'm not even in my hood, not in London. And I thought it was, yes, there you go. Great idea, as you do in Sydney on a Friday afternoon, to accompany one of our technicians on some jobs, some repair jobs. And I tell you what, my objective was actually really simple. I wanted a simple validation. Is technology we're investing in helping, or is it adding load? We have probably over the last 3 years invested the best part of 20 million in our field services. For us, it's absolutely central to digital workplace. It's actually, I would say, a core differentiator for Unisys. It's not a side activity, it's the core of our business. 7,300 technicians delivering enterprise support, dispatch, infrastructure support, now also expanding into liquid cooling, immersion cooling. So these guys are really critical to our success, our client success. And considering large investment in platforms, in technology, in AI, in tooling supporting the technician on the go, I really wanted to see, again, is it helping? Is it adding load? Is it hindering? And how are we actually doing with this adoption? This super key important word, adoption, and whether our organizational change management is supporting that adoption. So, it was absolutely fantastic to quietly observe, help where I could, but at the same time really assess that technology investment and how it's supporting technicians on the go.
Well, I applaud it, and I think it's wonderful, and I think it should be done on a cadence and consistently. And I think, we as an organization believe in the voice of the frontline being a real important and critical input to transformation, innovation, and an opportunity to meet the customer where they need to be met more commonly. We do an annual research effort called The Voice of the Field Service Engineer, and it's become quite popular now, almost in its 10th year running. We've amassed almost 20,000, actually we've eclipsed 20,000 technician and field service engineer respondents over that period. And what we learned from that effort is just tremendous in terms of how do we align leadership principles and actions against what the frontline encounters and needs. So I love that. And, one of the statistics from that survey in previous years, we've certainly seen improvement, but 60% of field technicians did not feel that management was listening to their input in terms of opportunity to enhance the business. And almost 40% did not feel like they had a role in innovation. So listening, learning, and then acting upon are quite critical. So I applaud you for doing so. Let's get into the second part. So what was encountered, right? So what walk us through what the day looked like from the moment you met the technician to the first job. What surprised you most about the friction in those micro moments that they were navigating before they even execute the service delivery?
Oh my goodness, so many things. I tell you what, it was the biggest eye opener. So yes, we met in the morning. My technician actually met me at the hotel, and straight away I was surprised that they were actually carrying some of the smaller parts with them. We've got the ability to send them to depot and pick up some parts before they go to do a specific job. But I think, it was interesting to see how they organize themselves, probably from, lessons learned. So he was actually with his very neatly packed rucksack with all the parts, all the tools, and also some spare motherboards and some other equipment. So, it was even before the work started, it was the having the right equipment. When we got to the first job, it was about the access. It was actually what took us the longest was finding the right contact. We are in this hybrid workplace situation, right? So sometimes the name you have on your ticket, on your application, is actually a completely different name of the person you're going to greet on site. So you might be asking for John and talking to Adam. It's incredible how much time is actually spent on finding the right place or even the right floor, the right door, then the right person, the right workspace. I mentioned parts, even before that, parking, safety. Yeah. We're crossing roads, we were climbing. Oh my goodness. All of this stuff is actually rarely smooth. And I think all of that adds to what I would call, a bit of a time tax, right? And this time tax is real because, of course, as an executive in my, again, very comfortable chair, normally I would be looking at number of tickets a technician took per day. And I would be thinking, the time it takes from this place to this place, and then the time spent on the resolution and potentially some documentation and, conversation with the end user to find themselves. But of course, it's what we just said, it's the access, it's the contact, it's the workspace, parts, parking, safety, all the kind of stuff. And actually, I just did not realize that these assumingly perfect handoffs don't actually exist. I think it's incredible to me because we talk so much in the industry about reducing digital friction. This concept of, focusing on using AI, using all the tools, using all the investments to remove digital friction. But actually, in the case of field services, it's the kind of micro frictions that kind of compound into these delays and a little bit of stress for these guys, and often rework, right? And rework in the context of field services is not good for anyone. It's not good for the client, not good for us commercially. And it's certainly not great for a delayed tech who probably will likely have to go back and repeat a visit. So it was, John, it was just so incredibly eye-opening. It wasn't actually the doing of the work and fixing or replacing something or supporting or maintaining. It was all this stuff around that was consuming, eating the most time.
Yeah, and that's before the work begins, right? Yeah. And so that's quite amazing. And on the topic of like leadership and looking at utilization rates and number of tickets conducted per day, number of job visits per day, we've seen an evolution of that metric of utilization move from number of tickets to time spent being productive for the very reasons you're talking about, right? Those micro moments that impede getting to work and actually doing the work, right? So I love the talk track there. Let's get into the customer expectation, because faster, seamless resolution. But from what you witnessed, there are probably invisible barriers between a technician arriving on site and then delivering on that promise. You talked about parking and finding the right party and all those other things. What does leadership often not see from the dashboard view, right? We all look at the dashboards, the KPIs and all these things. What is not seen there that is encountered in that friction between, enabling fast resolution and customer seamlessness? What other things did you realize in this process?
Do you know what? It's such a great question. I think, we need to start from who actually logs a ticket. I think tickets often come from someone who isn't on site, who doesn't perhaps understand, how the person who knows sometimes isn't available. And I think just having this awareness that tickets don't come from someone who isn't on site is straight away giving you this kind of awareness of, okay, so there might be some things missing. And I think, you mentioned dashboards and information we track. Well, dashboards track resolution time, they track closure, travel time, resolution steps, multiple other metrics that we're so used to in the industry. But they don't track the time lost finding the right human. We just talked about it, right? Finding the right human whose issue you want to fix. They don't really track the kind of fixing the bad site intel in terms of who is who in the zoo, where are they, and where is the build room, as an example, right? Because of course finding an office is one thing, but imagine if it's a busy bank. And actually one of the clients we went to that day was a bank, and of course that technician had to find a quiet space to be able to lay all his tools out and actually replace the motherboard. And that's another thing, right? You sometimes wouldn't expect to do it in an open space, but those receiving you might not even expect that you might need slightly more room to actually make yourself comfortable to have two sets of tools, laptops, etc. So it's so interesting. I think customers feel the friction, not the effort, which I think is really why the experience and the outcomes matter more than the activity. But it's the activity that buries on a component level so much more complexity, if that makes sense. So I'll be honest with you, I came back and actually to that great point of the question you've just asked, I looked at our dashboard thinking, wow, how do we show the entirety of what these guys do, and probably actually give them a little bit more credit, understand the pressure.
I love that. I love that. Credit is due. And so I appreciate that comment. Absolutely. We don't understand all the challenges. Like another, for example, right? Perhaps the triage and diagnosis for this particular instance requires more than one part to be carried to the job. And that might take multiple visits to and from truck stock, right? And so you never know what you're going to encounter, these little moments that make up the time suck that doesn't achieve the utilization rate that we're all aiming for, right? So there's some trickery inside here to realizing all these little inhibitors to a successful field service visit. So I love that you're giving credit to all the above. Can we talk about the technology as an enabler or an added burden? You started out our discussion on whether or not these investments were actually helping or hurting or harming the friction points in the day-to-day. So you went on into this right along, looking at AI and field service platform investments. I think you're working with Salesforce Agentforce and its impact on pre-work briefs and read aloud features and all sorts of cool things that you're doing in that partnership. What did you find? Are they enabling your technicians? Are they adding burden to their day inadvertently? Like, what did you observe?
Great question. Short answer is yes. I think technology is helping our teams on the go. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Yes, we are working with Salesforce using Agentforce, or actually, I think it's now Salesforce 360. The name keeps evolving there. So, from a pre-work brief that you can read aloud in a car on your AirPods as you're walking around between appointments, to work steps and actually resolution steps, to post-work summary, which allows you to do a lot kind of less admin stuff. There's some incredible advancements there. What was really interesting on this ride along is that this technician was actually using both applications. We were using the Agentforce and actually the previous application we've been using. And one of the things he said to me, he said, well, I understand that we've got this new tool and it's got all this AI and it's supposed to be helping me, but I'm used to the old one. And I thought to myself, oh, okay. First lessons learned for us in leadership is perhaps bring these guys on a journey super early, be them part of the testing, which we do, but perhaps not on the scale of, all 7,000 technicians. But I thought, the kind of purpose was missing. So obviously, this technician understood that we're trying to put something better in front of them to make his life easier, but he didn't really understand, why we didn't all at once. We kind of had the old for some stuff and the new with some of the features. So it was an interesting moment because it was in between. And I explained saying, look, we didn't want to disable the old one. You already got the new one. And we had a great conversation about it. But actually, I think hindsight is wonderful. And I came back and I told our deployment team saying, look, we have to be quite deliberate in kind of switching off instead of moving on. And sometimes I know we always thrive for perfection and we want these products and configurations to be perfect and ready, but actually 80-20 is good enough. And perhaps, we need to be a little more deliberate in switching something off, switching something else on, doing training, doing good organizational change management campaign, and just letting these guys use one, because I think it was a little bit confusing. So that was interesting. So overall, yes, technology helped. The transition in between two tools was a little bit confusing. The other thing that was really interesting is these guys have their ways of working, and they're subject matter experts. So of course, you then also are trying to convince them why the new tool is good and how it's going to help with some of those, more routine tasks like documentation. So again, we had a good chat about, look, we really want you to use your subject matter expertise on fixing, not on documenting. And he then understood why we sort of went the way we went with the tool. So again, great conversation. But I think, from my perspective, adoption is also situational. We were in the metro area. We were, in a perhaps more kind of established break and fix scenario. There wasn't sort of, huge amount of surprise to the 4 or 5 jobs we did together. But I'm just thinking, if this was rural, if it was long drive kind of situation, the same features could be landing completely differently. So, for example, being able to read out loud pre-work summary, on your car audio as you have a long drive, and then go through some of the preparation, or even talk to AI around what resolution you might apply. If you encounter different potential scenarios from a break fix standpoint. So I think that's another thing. One size does not fit all. And depending on again, location, geography, time to get to the site, technology can be used in so many different ways. So that was another great eye opener. Overall, we think AI really should be removing admin load, not adding steps, and freeing technicians to really focus on customer and on the fix. And I think that we achieved, but it also gave me appreciation that there is probably 105 different flavors of how the technology could be used, tweaked, right? And ultimately, that we still have a long way ahead in terms of really making it, work for all. And I love that saying, one size does not fit all, and that was a great example of that.
I love the commentary here, and there's a couple things to extract. I love that you're thinking about it as human and technology, not human or technology. The two entities that are impacting the customer experience are critically important. And we believe that we're moving forward in a world where these two things will grow together into a symbiotic and relationship that is meaningful to the customer. And so there's going to be like a co-evolution of technology to align with human behavior, to adapt human behavior, but also work with human behavior, right? So there's a concept of removing friction in the change management process. And I'm authoring a thought leadership article on change management and behavior pattern loops, they're called. And this is like studied in psychology. And I'm writing an article using the sitcom Breaking Bad. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
Yes.
It's hilarious. And it was one of my favorite series. And I was a late follower of the series. I just watched it recently and I couldn't stop. I binged it in like 2 weeks. You know, Walter White evolves from a high school chemistry teacher to a drug kingpin. and how did he break, you know, pattern behaviors? And how do we as humans break pattern behaviors? And so I'm going to outline in this article, you know, how do you identify the pattern and be honest about that pattern? Because sometimes we hide those little idiosyncrasies in our behavioral patterns. How do you find the cue and understand the reward? How do you map the loop and then choose a replacement? And then how do you move to reduce the friction for the new and increase the friction for the old so that you can insert a pause and then repeat consistently the new behavior, right? So there's like a consistent process that you can go through to effect change in behavior patterns and have a successful outcome. So I love some of your commentary here. Can we get into you know, the connection of the frontline and the brand? So you spent a day in the field. How would you describe the gap, if there is one, between what leadership believes it's providing to the frontline technicians and what those technicians experience, right? So, you know, and then how does that manifest itself in terms of what does it mean for how Unisys thinks about its support model in general, from a branding perspective, from a customer promise perspective? Maybe you could talk about those two things.
Such a great question. Yes, absolutely. Look, I think, you know, as leaders, we often leave, you know, behind PowerPoints and ROI calculations and, you know, securing investments. And then we think, oh, you know, everyone deserves a pat on the back. We deployed tools. Yay. The tech feels, oh my goodness, I'm still chasing access. I'm hunting for knowledge. I'm doing this double entry because Patrycja put 2 tools in front of me, not one. You know, from my perspective, that these ride-alongs really are such a absolutely key activity, and I want to do once every quarter in every region, because ultimately we are designing from behind laptops for people who work from vans, loading docks, server rooms. And straight away, you've got a corporate focused leader designing for frontline worker. And, you know, again, from my perspective, that perspective is so hugely important. So, you know, that leadership gap versus what's actually happening on the ground, I think is still there. This was a great eye opener. From my perspective, support models must be built for real conditions, right? We talked about, you know, parking, noise, safety, these offline moments. And the best one, one-handed work. And, you know, it was just incredible to see one guy with a rucksack doing 5 jobs, carrying these parts. You know, there was no one there with him. He was by himself. Everything from a mobility standpoint, laptop, if you needed to use the laptop. Quite frankly, he said to me, I prefer the phone. I only, you know, really would fire up the laptop if I really have to. And in many cases, if I know what jobs are coming, I would actually not even bring the laptop with me, because guess what? It's weight, and I'm walking around central Sydney, and you know, it's adding right to what I have to carry around. So that was probably really a light bulb moment. We still have a long way ahead to really thinking about just being alone on a job, facing a corporate client, often not satisfied, right? I always say this, look, no one calls the services to say, hey, what a great weather. And by the way, you're doing so well. These guys are calling to report problems, issues, something that's preventing them from focusing on their business outcomes, i.e. doing their job without the digital friction, right? Without friction overall. So you already are entering an environment which, quite frankly, is in some cases hostile. We expected you yesterday. You can't fix it. Oh, what do you mean water damage? Water damage is not covered by the under warranty, and you kind of like, wow, okay. And in many cases, John, these guys, imagine if it's someone fresh from college, right? Who perhaps haven't encountered all of the flavors of these situations. So again, I think from my perspective, it's not just how we equip these guys to succeed, but ultimately how this technology, and we're talking about digital agents, and I think Salesforce with Agentforce or Salesforce 360 is really offering that kind of what we used to call dial-a-buddy, right? You now have a digital agent working alongside yourself, having that true support, whether it's pre-work brief, post-work summary, but it's also that resolution. It's also, I've not encountered this problem. Let's see. What's the resolution here, and the direct access to knowledge. So look, we've gone so far ahead with how technology can support these guys on the go. Still I think a fair bit to go. And again, from an executive standpoint, we still need to really think about some of those physical constraints, whether it's noise, safety, and again, just thinking about one guy, one rack, right? One-handed work. So yeah.
Yeah, but I think you bring up something really interesting in that some technician frontline agents don't possess that situational awareness, that empirical evidence of you're going to encounter this, that, and the other thing. And so what does that do? It may erode their own personal experience, and that might lead to employee engagement issues. And we all know field service is facing a talent crisis with retirement. And all these little friction moments can create an even deeper employee engagement crisis, even at the younger demographic, because we're not preparing them for those moments that they just gnaw at you, right? They make you, they exhaust you, or they make you not enjoy the job, right? And so what did you find about the emotional side of things after living one day in that reality? What did you hear or see or witness that, what it meant to be emotionally to be a frontline technician? Did you see anything that spoke out to you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, gained a lot of respect for the team on the ground, but I was just, thinking, gosh, if this was me, this potentially could be quite isolating. You're in the face of a brand under pressure. You just made a great point, often without perfect information. And I think another great point here is that we are dealing with such diversity across technician sort of population. You have best part of 4, in fact, I think 5 generations now, in terms of new techs expecting instant guidance, right? We talked a little bit before this podcast about our children. Who have completely different expectations to some of our more savvy technicians who are, quite frankly, getting ready for well-deserved retirement in the next few years.
Yeah.
These veterans would carry deep craft, right? Knowledge. These new techs expect instant guidance. Both need knowledge at the moment of need. And I think you're right. I think retention is a challenge. I think we need to respect the craft with modern tools, coaching, and again, try and reduce some of that cognitive load. So it's so much to think about. But I think that the most probably striking moment was really understanding that it can be quite isolating. Whatever we can do to again help from mobility standpoint, help from AI enablement, having that digital agent which feel like dial-a-buddy kind of support there with you is so incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too that I've been commonly talking about with members is this notion that you can't yes, you can create a one size fits all in terms of pattern behavior when it comes to the technical skill set side. You can certainly, guide and script. We've heard about guided workflows and the institution of decision trees, and that is a common deployment strategy and predictive and proactive approach to upskill, reskill, and drive consistent practice. But the human side of things, you need to consider the different behavioral patterns that align with that person, right? That they may learn or value different parts of the job, and you can't just think one size fits all in that respect, right? So some don't mind isolation. They actually would rather work isolated as a soloist. Some like the camaraderie of team involvement, right? There are different learning and behavioral patterns that we need to understand and align with, and think about it from an omni-channel perspective, from a diversity perspective. Not everybody, we can't make this a robot exercise, right? We can't take away the fun from the technical side of it by just guiding and scripting everything. They like solving problems. They like wearing that cape and being the hero. And they are different and unique humans on the other side, right? So there's some things to think about there in terms of the platforms we're creating to align with the person and the human, but also the technical side. That's all that I would caution people to think about. Now, looking ahead, if you could change one thing tomorrow, one investment, one policy, one mindset shift to make it more meaningful, life meaningfully better for your frontline technicians, what would that be?
Just one. It's tough if it's just one, but let me think perhaps about the most important, which is, from my perspective, delivering the right knowledge at the right time, at the point of work. So, we talked about pre-brief, we talked about guided steps, fast wrap-up, enabling the human better, making frontline the center of our strategy and investment from a perspective of, knowledge is king. The right knowledge at the right time can fix everything, and do it in such ways and in a good time that, again, thinking about the human, all I want really from my technicians is to be able to go home and have dinners with their family, not to be stuck doing lengthy jobs because they don't have the means or the tools, or God forbid doing rework or coming back the next day. So I still, probably traditionally, although if you think about knowledge curation and how it can use AI to produce even better knowledge, for me, it would be right knowledge at the right time at the point of work.
Outstanding. And I've got one bonus question for you, Patrycja, for our audience. A lot of people have learned about you through your speeches and through LinkedIn and connecting with you at events and other things. Maybe something that our listenership doesn't know about you, personal, something you're looking forward to, a personal passion, maybe something you could share with our audience.
Oh, that's a great one. Thank you. Yeah. Well, look, having done this experience in the field, actually, one thing I absolutely love, and these days perhaps don't have as much time to do that, is just sticking my nose in what's happening in tech labs. We've got quite a large lab in Bangalore. We've got some labs in Bluebell in Pennsylvania, in our headquarters, and here in the UK. I just love going in and sticking my nose instead of seeing what's cooking, seeing how work actually really happens. So I'm really the happiest in the field. Whether it's a lab, whether it's, alongside the guys, it's just the best thing. And the other thing, actually, we talked a little bit about these micro frictions today. Since that ride along, actually, I became a little bit obsessed with removing all the micro frictions I can see. Every day I now ask myself, oh, okay, that took me a little bit longer. Could I perhaps have used AI, maybe Copilot, to help myself? Could I somewhat prevented, what happened? So two things. Happy in the field and understanding again, what great technology sort of advancements we're building for the next generation, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, and then secondly, continue to remove this digital friction, including myself.
I love it. That experimental enthusiasm will serve your frontline well. So she is Patrycja Sobera. She is the Senior Vice President and General Manager of Digital Workplace Solutions of Unisys Corporation. Oh, by the way, I never mentioned this at the front. Patrycja and her leadership team have been so gracious. They'll be hosting one of our Service Journey Days, October 13th in Budapest, Hungary. So if you would like to see firsthand Unisys's culture, their approach, please express your interest in joining us there October 13th in Budapest, Hungary. We'll have a small group, we'll do an operational tour, and we'll have some fun together learning. So Patrycja, thank you so much. This has been a great discussion. We got to do this again. This was wonderful.
Love this. Thank you so much, John. And absolutely, everyone's welcome to come and join us. We'd love to see as many of you as we can in Budapest. Thank you.
Outstanding. We'll see you on the next episode. This is available by recording. You can share it with colleagues. Thank you for joining. Have a great weekend.